Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is going to be a video series on classes and object-oriented programming in JavaScript. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about in this series of videos, and we're going to have some fun with it. Okay, so bottom line, what is a class? A class is just easiest way to think about it. If you haven't seen all my other videos on prototypes and all this stuff, I'm going to keep it real simple. What you're doing is you're creating a template for creating objects, okay, in JavaScript. And if you don't know what objects are in JavaScript, then you need to take a step back and watch my videos on objects before watching this series. So bottom line is what I could do is we'll create a new class and we'll call a class person. Okay, and there you go, you have a class. And now I can create a new variable called, we'll say Bob, and Bob equals a new person. And then we will console.log Bob. Save. So now if I run this code, see, I have a person. Bob is a person, but again, right now person doesn't really do anything. It's just an object that's labeled person. And the reason why you have this person label, because it uses whenever you use this new keyword, it looks for a function called the constructor, and it runs that. So when you see an object like this and it says person, it just means this object was created with the person constructor. And why that's useful is because now I can actually test, is Bob a person? So I can actually do this. I can be like, Bob instance of person. Okay, and that should give me back true. Cool. Okay, now is Bob an array? Bob is not an array, but let's just confirm that. Is Bob an instance of array? False. Okay, so that's one nice thing. So even if I do nothing else with this class, I've now given a way to identify which of my objects are persons. That's neat. Cool. But really, the reason you have classes is because you want to bundle properties and methods. Properties, think of them as adjectives. So how do I describe a person? And then you have methods, which are the things that the verbs. What does a person do? Okay, all wrapped up in this noun, the person. Okay, and this is what's referred to as object-oriented programming. You're taking the things that we're trying to do in our program, and we're trying to encapsulate them, thus encapsulation, into a thing. So here we have a noun, the person, and we're going to describe the adjectives and verbs, the properties and methods of the person. So we have constructor. Well, even before that. So if we want to define the properties of the person, we need to do that when we create the person. So we need to construct the person. So you have to create a function, and it has to have this name. It has to be constructor. So constructor isn't like a function where we made up the name. It's a built-in function we have to put in. Because the way a class works is that the minute the class is created, the minute I hit this new keyword, it's going to look for this constructor function and run that. Okay? Okay, and in here I can define any properties that I want. Okay, so I'd like to have a property called, and you always have to use the word this. This refers to the individual person. So when we create Bob, it's going to refer to Bob. So it's Bob dot whatever. So this is always the instance of person. So this dot name. I want Bob to have a name. But where does the name come from? I could just statically put Bob in there, but then every person would be named Bob, and that's no fun. So how could I dynamically give Bob a name? Just like any function, I could pass a parameter. So we'll pass a parameter name Bob, and we'll just say that the name of the instance of person will equal the Bob argument, the name argument. So now when I create my person, I'll pass in that argument, Bob, and Bob will go into name, and this dot name will equal Bob. So now let's just run this again. Let's console log Bob. Save. And now see, Bob has a name now. Nice. So now I have a person object and he adds a name. Okay, this doesn't seem like super crazy. Again, when you start having much more complicated objects, this becomes more and more useful. Okay, cool. Now, let's see here. Bob should also do things. We want methods. So Bob can greet. Okay, and you just define methods like this, sort of in that syntax. So we'll say greet, and greet will be console.log hello. Hello, my name is, then we'll use interpolation, and we'll say this dot name, so equals this instance's name, so it would be bob.name. Save. So now I'll create two people, so we'll have const Steve equals new person, Steve, okay, and we'll say who, we'll pass in an argument called who into greet, because we're going to say hello to the person you're talking to, so hello who dot name, and since the other, we're expecting that you're passing in a person as who, so any person should have a name property, because all persons have a name property. I've defined it over here. So now I can be like this. So we'll just say bob.greet Steve. Steve.greet Bob. So now that our objects can interact with each other. See, hello Steve, my name is Bob. Hello Bob, my name is Steve. So you're creating different instances of an object, basically just creating a blueprint, and then once we create the new person, it's a living, breathing, it's like a blueprint for a house. You know, while the blueprint means every house starts at the same place, after you create it, every house becomes sort of its own unique thing. Any changes to the house after you've created it are unique to that house. So I could go and add a property to Bob. So I'll say, hey, Bob's dot cheese equals Gouda. Actually, string Gouda. Now I can be like console.log bob.cheese. Okay. Oh, I should probably spell Bob correctly. Save. And then you see there, I can console.log Gouda. But Steve doesn't have cheese, because I just added this property to Bob, not to Steve. Because Steve, well, control that, Z. So if I were to do Steve.cheese, save. Okay, undefined, because Steve does not have cheese. So what if I did want to add it to both of them? Well, what happens whenever you create a class, what you're really doing is you're playing with prototypes in JavaScript. So that class has a prototype, and that's where you would add the cheese. So I could do, after the fact, I can be like, you know, person dot prototype dot cheese. Okay, because person is just really the constructor function, and what it does, it constructs an object that uses this prototype property, this prototype object, as its prototype. So it's actually this sort of template object that it creates that it's referring to. So that's why you have to do person.prototype, because technically this prototype object is a property of the person function, because at the end of the day, functions are objects too, which is kind of a weird quirk in JavaScript. So you could actually give properties to functions if you really wanted to. I can't think of many reasons to do that outside of this context, but it is what it is. Okay, so now I added that. So now Steve does have cheese, and so does Bob. So if I go, now everyone likes Gouda. I just made it where all people like Gouda. Bob.cheese. And now they both like Gouda. Okay, see, Gouda. Cool. So that's classes. Again, allows you to create a template for an object. So now I can create new instances of that object. I use this keyword, refers to the individual instance. So it refers to Bob, Steve, in the context of creating Bob and Steve. If I want to add properties, I typically add them in the constructor. You could add properties outside of the constructor. So I could just be like, and then you don't have to use this keyword outside of the constructor. And here I can be like, cheese equals Gouda. And it'll still you know, it'll work. So now I can just get rid of this whole prototype line, and again, both of them will like cheese again. Save. Okay, and if you're wondering why I explicitly save instead of using Control S, the reason is because that way you, the viewer, can explicitly see what I'm doing instead of just assuming that I saved. Okay, in case there's any errors or anything. Hello Bob, my name is Steve, and you can see they both still like Gouda. Okay, so you can define properties. The only difference here is I can't dynamically name them. Usually if you want things that the user is going to give you, as far as like, okay, hey, like I want to choose the name when I construct it, I want to do it here in the constructor. So I can define properties in and out of the constructor, but if I want to be able to select what the property's value is at construction, it's got to be done in the constructor. So that's first video on classes. I'll see you guys in the next video where we'll talk about inheritance. Ciao.